In a dimly lit chamber, lined with dust-laden books and forgotten manuscripts, an old professor named Arturo DeLoren sat alone before a candle's flicker. Once a revered philosopher and political theorist, Arturo now dwelled in obscurity, banished. From academia, for ideas too dangerous, to Machiavellian, for the refined sensibilities of modern minds. On this night, he returned to a forgotten essay he had penned decades earlier, a paper dismissed by peers and reviled by moralists. Its title, hand-scrawled in fading ink, read, "The Archetype of Desire, Woman, Power, and the Virtue of Men." It was, as he once claimed in lecture halls, a synthesis of love and strategy, emotion and dominion, written under the shadow of Machiavelli himself. Arturo believed something few dared admit, that love, especially romantic love, is not a passive gift bestowed, but a territory to be claimed by those with the will to seize it. His thesis was simple, yet incendiary. Women do not fall in love with kindness. They fall in love with vision. And what kind of man carries vision? Not the man who begs, nor the one who waits. It is the man who chooses purpose over pleasure. It's the man who commands time, who leads his life with a quiet yet immovable direction. It's not arrogant, but sovereign. It's not cold, but focused. This man is not a tyrant, but he is unyielding in his pursuit of self-mastery, to Machiavelli. Virtue was the essence of power, not brute force, but the internal command over chaos. Arturo adapted this. In his mind, virtue was also the key to desire. In the candlelight, Arturo whispered to himself, "She does not love you because you give her flowers. She loves you because you make her feel that life is larger when she is near you, more dangerous when she is not." The archetype he described was not a cliché alpha male, nor a manipulative charmer. It was a man who did not seek validation from women, nor from society. He lived with a private code, a purpose that guided every decision. His silence spoke, louder than need. His attention was rare and therefore sacred. This man, what Arturo called Il Signore dell'Ombra, the Lord of the Shadow, did not chase love. He radiated it. He did not ask to be chosen. He chose, and in that choosing, he revealed an ancient truth, that the deepest part of a woman's heart is stirred not by safety, but by intensity, not by comfort, but by transformation. Arturo had seen this archetype in history long before dating advice littered the internet. In Alexander, who wept not for love, but for the limits of the world. In Marcus Aurelius, who mourned deeply but ruled, UNFLINCHINGLY. In Leonardo, who painted desire into the Mona Lisa, but shared his passion only with destiny. They were not perfect men, but they were sovereign. In the years of his exile, Arturo had been visited by many young men disillusioned, lost, desperate to understand why their softness was overlooked, why their goodness was punished with silence. He gave them no comfort. Instead, he would ask, "Do you lead yourself?" Most would stare blankly. He explained, "A woman cannot follow a man who is not already going somewhere. She may stay, but she will never burn." One rainy evening, a student named Rafael returned after years abroad. His eyes held storms. He had read Arturo's essay and lived by its creed. But now he questioned it. "I followed purpose," Rafael said, "but I am alone. Have I lost love forever in the pursuit of strength?" Arturo studied him, then spoke slowly. "There is a second truth, rarely spoken. The man who embodies vision must learn when to open the gate, to allow tenderness not as weakness, but as conscious surrender. Love is not conquered by walls, but by thresholds." Rafael said nothing, but his heart stirred. He understood at last. The archetype was not a prison. It was a vessel. One must know how to hold fire and still feel the warmth. In his final years, Arturo returned to his manuscript, not to edit, but to expand. He added only one final line, carved onto the last page like a benediction. "Be a man she can love, not because she must, but because loving you awakens the lioness in her soul." And so, Arturo's philosophy remains half shadow, half flame. Some say his ideas are dangerous, others say they are salvation. But to those who seek truth in the murky waters of love, his words remain a lighthouse shrouded in smoke. Part 2. The Threshold of Tenderness. After his meeting with Arturo, Rafael disappeared for months. No letters, no calls, no signs of return. The professor assumed he had vanished into the world like so many others, consumed by ambition or broken by the weight of its pursuit, but the truth was far more complex. Rafael had left not to escape Arturo's teaching, but to test its final frontier. Can a man devoted to vision also surrender to intimacy without losing his power? We traveled east, to the old cities of Europe, where poets and warriors once walked the same rain-soaked stones. There he met her. Her name was Selene. She was not drawn to him like others had been. She was not impressed by his self-discipline or the stillness in his gaze. She looked at him not as a prize or a mystery, but as a mirror. "You walk like you're searching for something," she said one night. "But you look like you're hiding." He laughed, a rare sound. "And you?" "I stopped searching. I started listening." In her presence, Rafael felt a strange trembling. Not weakness, but softness. A quiet invitation to lay down the armor. To unlearn what he had clung to. He wanted to tell her everything. The teachings of Arturo, the philosophy of sovereignty, the balance between power and presence. But words failed. She was not a theory. She was experience itself. The kind that does not demand explanation, only attention. He remembered Arturo's final words, "Love is not conquered by walls, but by thresholds." And so, one evening beneath an old cathedral's shadow, Rafael chose to cross that threshold. He confessed not his feelings, but his fears, that loving might make him ordinary, that in surrendering, he would lose the fire that made him who he was. Selene listened, then said quietly, "Real strength is not the man who fears losing power. It's the man who knows he will remain himself even in love." Rafael stayed silent, but the old armor cracked, not shattered, just loosened enough for warmth to enter. They shared weeks that felt like lifetimes. Mornings of laughter, nights of long silences, where bodies spoke more than language. She never demanded to be led, nor did she follow. She walked beside. And that, Rafael realized, was the secret. The archetype Arturo spoke of was not just the Lord of the Shadow. There was another, the man of the horizon. One who does not command by dominance, but by invitation. One who says, "Come with me, not because I own the path, but because I have chosen it." Eventually Rafael returned. He found Arturo frail, lying near the window of his crumbling home, surrounded by books and ghosts. "You were right," Rafael said. Arturo nodded faintly. But you were also incomplete." That brought a slow smile to the old man's lips. "Tell me," Arturo whispered, and Rafael did. He spoke of Selene, of the tension between strength and softness, of the freedom that came not from isolation, but from shared vision. Arturo's eyes welled up not with sadness, but with revelation. "Then write it," he said. "Add it to the manuscript. It is no longer mine. It is ours." Rafael picked up the pen that had been waiting on the desk for years. He wrote, "To lead is divine. To love while leading is transcendence." The candle burned lower, but the flame had passed on now. Arturo's teachings are whispered not just in secret societies of scholars, but in silent conversations between lovers who understand that power is not the opposite of vulnerability, but its foundation. And Rafael walks still. Somewhere in the world, no longer seeking, no longer hiding, but listening. Always listening. Part 3. The covenant of fire. Rafael's return to Arturo marked not the end of his journey, but its transmutation. For years, he had sought to master the dialectic of power and love. Now he sought to teach it. But how do you teach a generation trained to fear vulnerability? How do you reach men conditioned to believe that to feel is to fail? Rafael chose not to write a book. He chose not to teach in universities. Instead, he created a gathering, a space hidden from the algorithms and noise of modernity. Called it La Fiamma Nascosta, the hidden flame. Held beneath a crumbling monastery in Tuscany, the retreat became a sanctuary for men who were weary of surface strength and women who no longer trusted softness. Together, they studied silence. They practiced presence. And in the candlelit chambers, stories were told not of conquest, but of confrontation with the self. It was there that Raphael introduced what he called the covenant of fire, philosophical, pact drawn from Machiavelli, stoicism, and the quiet wisdom of Selene. I do not chase. I lead myself. I do not demand love. I embody what is lovable. I do not fear solitude. I honor it. I do not confuse surrender with submission. I speak not to impress, but to reveal. I allow myself to burn, and in doing so I light the way it was. Not a creed for the weak, nor a slogan for the self-helped. It was a mirror, and not all who looked into it chose to stay. Among those who did was a man named Ezra, a former corporate strategist. Sharp and calculated, Ezra had built empires of logic, but found no kingdom in his heart. He approached Raphael one dusk. Words are beautiful, but in the real world, they don't survive the battlefield. Women want results, not poetry. Raphael studied him carefully. Then he asked, "And when you close your eyes at night, do your results keep you warm?" Ezra said nothing. Raphael continued, "Power without soul is ash, and no one loves ash." It wasn't an argument. It was a reflection. Ezra stayed. One night, by the monastery's stone fountain, Selene returned. Older now, but even more grounded. She observed the gathering, watched the men speak with hesitation, then courage. She approached Raphael. "They're learning," she said. "But are you still listening?" Raphael smiled. "Always." She nodded, then added softly, "The world is changing. These men will carry something dangerous into a trial presence. Be careful. The world has always feared men who do not need to be loud." In the months that followed, whispers of La Fiamma Nascosta began to circulate beyond Tuscany. Women wrote letters, some filled with admiration, others with warnings. Political writers speculated that Raphael was building a cult. But those who attended knew otherwise. They were not being taught to seduce. They were being taught to return to a forgotten self buried under expectations, performance, and inherited weakness. And somewhere in the silence, a new question began to form. Can a generation reawaken the sacred through love, not as fantasy, but as fire? The manuscript Arturo had begun was now pages longer, filled with testimonies and poetry, philosophical fragments, and real confessions. It had become a living text, never published, always passed hand to hand. It's like a sacred relic. But the story was far from over. One day a mysterious letter arrived for Raphael. No name, no sender. Only a single phrase. There are others, waiting, listening. Lead them. And beneath it, a symbol from Machiavelli's discourses on Livy, the Ouroboros serpent eating its own tail. Cycle, return, renewal. Part 4. The order of the Ouroboros, the arrival of the anonymous letter, marked the beginning of the next chapter, not just for Raphael, but for the entire hidden network that had emerged around La Fiamma Nascosta. The serpent devouring its tail, the Ouroboros, was not merely a symbol of eternity, it was a cipher. A signal. Raphael held the parchment for hours, tracing the ink with his fingers as if it contained a pulse. There are others, waiting, listening. The words echoed like footsteps in the catacombs of his memory. He returned to Arturo's manuscript that evening, searching for any mention of the symbol. He found it on the margin of a forgotten page, faint, penciled in beside a passage on perception as power. And beneath it, a phrase in Latin, quod incipit in tenebris, in lumen finiter. What begins in darkness will end in light. Raphael knew. Then Arturo had been part of something larger, something ancient, and now it was calling him forward. He left the monastery the next day with Selene at his side, traveling north toward the Alps. The letter was postmarked from Zurich, but he sensed the true origin lay deeper beneath the city, behind its pristine civility. In the shadows of finance and art, in the corners where philosophers once drank absinthe and spoke of forgotten truths, they found her in a bookstore. Her name was Ileana, historian of secret societies, fluent in dead languages, with eyes like carved obsidian. She studied Rafael not as a man, but as a movement. You awakened the flame, she said without introduction. But it was always meant to be a circle, not a sanctuary. She spoke of the order of the Ouroboros, an esoteric lineage tracing back to the Hermetic schools, passed through Machiavelli's inner circle, encoded in letters, paintings, and rituals. The order was never political, never religious. It was philosophical, dedicated to preserving the union of inner sovereignty and outer eros. Your monastery in Tuscany, she said, was the ignition. But the true work is to weave fire into the world's systems, law, architecture, story, even love. Rafael hesitated. Systems destroy souls. No, Ileana said. Soulless men destroy systems. You were trained for fire. Now you must bring it to the coldest rooms. He understood. That night, it descended into a library beneath the city on archive, maintained for centuries by those who never wrote history, but shaped its undercurrent. There, he saw scrolls inked with the same phrases he once spoke to Arturo. Men across centuries had touched the same truth, and left only echoes behind. Selene stood beside him, silent but present. Her hand on his shoulder reminded him, sovereignty without grounding is just wandering. Together, they chose. Over the next years, Rafael became not just a teacher, but a strategist. He advised leaders in secret, spoke quietly to diplomats. Inspired. Architects too designed cities that nurtured presence, not distraction. His words began to ripple outward not as doctrine, but as archetype. The sovereign man, the woman of flame, the covenant of fire, but with power came danger. Those who profited from a distracted, dependent populace began to notice. Algorithms shifted. Articles appeared discrediting La Fiamma Nascosta. Rafael was accused of seduction, cults, manipulation, patriarchal revivalism. He smiled at them all, because truth does not scream, it burns. And now in hidden places across the globe, new gatherings form not for worship, but for remembrance. In the forests of Japan, in the deserts of Morocco, in abandoned churches in Quebec, small circles sit in silence and say only this: I do not chase, I lead myself. And in my leading, I awaken those ready to rise. The Ouroboros continues to coil, and somewhere, in a quiet room of stone and fire, the manuscript still grows, its final page always blank, waiting part 5, the silence before thee. Storm years had passed since Rafael took the first step beyond Arturo's teachings. In the manuscript, now a living scroll passed by hand from continent to continent, had become more than philosophy. It had become a whispered revolution, not of violence, but of presence. Not of conquest, but of return. Yet as the truth expanded, so too did resistance. Governments began to monitor the meetings. Intelligence agencies tagged Rafael's gatherings as ideological catalysts, term invented not out of understanding, but of fear. For nothing threatens power like an individual who does not seek permission to be powerful. And in this new world of mass seduction where identities were built through screens and desires sold in data, Fail's message was not merely controversial, it was heretical. Lead yourself. That was the command that disturbed the machine most. Not because it was loud, because it taught people to hear themselves again. Selene, ever by his side, had become both oracle and anchor. Where Rafael spoke to fire, she tended the roots. Where he led men into presence, she guided women back into their bodies, away from performative femininity, and into elemental essence. But danger was no longer abstract. One night while traveling to a secluded retreat in the Pyrenees, their vehicle was intercepted by a blacked-out caravan. No insignia, no explanation, just an unmarked silence. Rafael and Selene were taken, not tortured, not threatened, but interviewed by calm voices in sterile rooms, with questions designed not to understand, but to categorize. Do you believe your movement could destabilize existing social contracts? Do you teach men to resist modern structures of emotional governance? Are you creating an archetype that cannot be monetized? Rafael answered each with a smile and silence. Because in the deepest moments of confrontation, stillness is the highest form of rebellion. They were released. No charges, no trace. But the message was clear. You have become visible. Invisibility is the prelude to erasure or transcendence. Upon returning to their base in Tuscany, Rafael made a decision. They would go underground again, not out of fear, but to evolve. Visibility had served its purpose. Now it was time to seed the world from within. A council was formed, 7 members, each carrying a fragment of the manuscript, responsible for one domain: education, law, relationship, art, economics, ritual, and myth. They did not preach. They embedded schools and startups in film. In the whispers of bedtime stories and the silence between music notes, the archetype spread like ancient spores, awakening, not through violence, but through resonance. Children began asking different questions. Lovers began choosing different partners. Power began to feel less like steel and more like firelight. But one final vision haunted Rafael. A dream he had repeatedly since Zurich. In it, he stood at the edge of a desert. Before him, a child, genderless, ageless. The child held a candle and whispered, "The storm is coming, and the storm is you, Rafael." Never spoke of this dream, but he prepared for it. He knew every age ends, not in destruction, but in memory, and the flame must be remembered. He began the final phase, Il Susurro, eternal whisper, a process to encode the manuscript not in pages, but in people. Each council member would train one successor, not in theory, but in life, through presence, through silence, through becoming. No longer would the archetype rely on words. It would live in blood, breath, and gaze. And so, a new generation began to emerge. Quiet, rooted, powerful, not influencers, but initiators, not followers. Of Rafael, but mirrors of what he mirrored, and in the quiet places of the earth, fire waited for the storm, for the awakening. For you, final part, the memory of Flame Rafael stood at the edge of the desert, the dream made flesh. The sun was descending behind the sand, a golden eye slowly closing. And there, just as he had seen night after night in sleep, was the child. Not of flesh, but of symbol. Neither boy nor girl, neither future nor past, simply origin. The child offered him a candle, flickering yet steady. "The storm is coming." They whispered, "And the storm is you." Rafael took the candle, and in that moment all memory returned. Arturo's teachings, Selene's gaze, Ileana's library, the monastery in Tuscany, the accusations, the gatherings, the manuscript that passed from hand to hand like contraband wisdom. All of it converged not into a doctrine, but a single flame. One that could no longer be held in books. It had to live inside people. He lit the candle from the desert wind, not against it, but with it. The flame did not flicker. It surged. Selene appeared beside him, not as a companion now, but as reflection. She too held a flame. They walked together into the open desert, each step dissolving the myth of separation. The storm rose behind them, not of clouds or sand, but of memory returning to the world. People everywhere, men and women alike, were awakening from inherited roles, from numbness, from the lie that love is a transaction and power a performance. Across continents, the last generation of the old world looked up, confused. Where did the noise go? Why did everything feel ... real? Because the fire had spread, the manuscript was no longer paper. It was eyes that met without flinching, hands that touched with reverence, words spoken with intention, or not spoken at all. Children raised not in safety, but in sovereignty. And somewhere, in an abandoned cathedral, now overgrown with ivy and time, a single line remained carved into the altar stone. Be the man she can love, not because she must, but because loving you awakens the lioness in her soul. The order of the Ouroboros dissolved itself. There was no need for secrecy anymore. The world had changed, not through war, not through rebellion, but through a remembrance of what it meant to be whole. And Rafael, he vanished, like all true myths do. Some say he walks still. Others say he was never a man, only a mirror. But every now and then, someone, perhaps a quiet man in a coffee shop, or a woman standing alone at a window, feels something deep in the ribs, a warmth that wasn't there before, and they remember the fire.